Today is Sunday, April 9th,
Yes.
2017. This is the beginning of an interview with
Bob Sedaille.
at the Summer Glen Golf Community. My name is Sam Kukoski, and I'll be the interviewer. Could you please tell us your full name and address?
Yeah, it's Robert Sedaille. I live in Ocala, Florida.
Where were you born?
Newark, New Jersey.
How old are you today?
Today, 70.
Who are your parents and what did they do?
All right, the mother worked back then was electronics, the old tube stuff, and my father was a steel worker, both up in New Jersey.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I have a daughter down in Boca Raton. I have another daughter that just passed away last year, and I have a son that lives in the United Kingdom, working with the military.
Did any of them serve? Did any of them serve in the military?
No, I'm the only one that has served. My son actually works for the United States Air Force.
Okay. What were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, I graduated high school, got my draft notice. Then I thought, well, I didn't really want to go in the Army because I could see what was going on. So I joined the Air Force when I was 18.
Why did you choose the Air Force?
I had a better chance for education, things like that, and I knew that the men at the time that were going into the Army, and I saw it when I went to the recruiter and we were sworn in, the guys that were drafted either went to the Marines or the Army, minimum training, and off to Vietnam. I at least went to tech school for 3 months, then I moved on to a base in Florida.
Where did you end up serving?
Where? Well, I started out at Tyndall Air Force Base, Florida. Then I went to the UK, and I went to Holland, and I went back to the UK. I deployed all over Europe. I worked in a fighter squadron, so we were deployed all the time. I came back one time, I went to Del Rio, Texas, lasted 6 months, volunteered for Thailand during the Vietnam thing because Texas, south of the border there, wasn't my best place to be for a city boy from the north.
Do you remember your basic training?
Yes.
Can you describe it?
Sure. Yeah, back then, the TIs were God. They were pretty rough on us. We had a tough one. We even got to work Easter in the mess hall at the hospital. We worked, if there was a holiday, we worked at the hospital. We got no time off. I remember I had my wisdom teeth pulled, went straight back, and out running the same day. So things were a bit different then.
Where did you receive your basic training?
Shepherd Air Force Base. Or Lackland Air Force Base for the basic training, and then I went on to Shepherd Air Force Base for technical training.
What weapons did you qualify on during basic training?
M16.
Did you have to receive any special training at tech school?
Just aircraft. I worked on jets 1 and 2, 2-engine jets. That's basically it. Other than that, we're pretty specific. I always, my whole career, 26 years, I spent on 2-engine jets. Even though you have like the F-16 out there, which is a lawn dart, single engine, we're sort of shredded out to what we work on.
How did you adapt to military life?
Pretty good. I enjoyed it. That's why I stayed 26. It was it's a different way of life. People don't understand it. Military people totally have a different lifestyle. The way they get together, they group up and things like that. You become closer friends because you're always out working. It's just a different lifestyle.
Were you married or single then?
When I joined, I was single. I got married just after that.
Now, living on base, what do you recall about like the food and the barracks and social life and stuff?
Well, back then, the barracks were basic. You had a bed, a metal locker, and that was it. Social life was good. Back then, the clubs did a lot more. I guess you could say they glamorized alcohol. Things changed. I mean, back then when I was in England, some of the major groups you see now, like the Who, the Beatles, and some of them used to actually come on the bases. But they couldn't afford to bring these groups on. So, and the clubs are really going, I won't say downhill, they just can't get the people to come out anymore.
What was your military specialty?
Aircraft maintenance, jets 1 and 2, all fighters.
Did you like doing that?
Well, yeah, okay. I started out on F4 as a Phantom. I actually started out on 101s, but I worked for a test squadron where we did testing of. We actually flew in. They'd launch a missile, and we would fly towards them. The pilot would fly towards the missile and take pictures of the missile and how it's reacting. And then I moved on to F4s over in Thailand. Then I did A-10 Thunderbolts. Let's see. I did F-15s. I was the line chief for F-15s. I had 24 aircraft I was responsible for. That was in Camp New Amsterdam in Holland. And then when I moved back to the UK, I got selected to go to wing plans, which I actually wrote war plans.
Pretty interesting. Were you part of any specific operations?
In a sense, back when we were in, what you call specific operations now is they're more publicized. Like two incidents. I was in North Africa and I was in Libya when Gaddafi took over. I was also in Tehran, Iran, when the Shah left, when we took him out with us. But see, those things aren't. Back then, it was never, as you would say, incidents, whatever you want to call them. It was just things happen.
How long were you overseas?
40 years. I spent 44 with the Air Force. I did 26 active, then I stayed on and did 18 years as a resource manager for an Air Force Inn, which we had a lot of the guys transitioning to the desert going through during Afghanistan.
What are some of your best memories of being overseas?
Probably the traveling, really. A lot of things happen at work, but that's work, and then but we get to travel a lot. Like I said, I deployed to so many different locations, and if it was feasible, you could get off the base and get around a little bit. Some places you could, some you couldn't. I found when I was in Tehran, it was nice. I was actually down there. We were in town, and we'd been there for a week, and then when the Ayatollah came in overnight, we went downtown the next day. He wasn't even in there at night, and all of a sudden the women had changed their clothing. However, you could see the trainers and the jeans underneath them. So they weren't all for it. He closed all the state stores. Anything that you call nice clothes, they didn't sell anymore.
How did you travel overseas?
It was always by aircraft. Most of the time it was a military aircraft, either out of McGuire Air Force Base or I flew out of San Francisco, depending which way I was going.
How did you stay in contact with your family back home?
Back then, you used a lot of telephones, a lot of quarters, a lot of German marks. If I was in Germany, I mean, it was strictly a telephone. Like my wife said, if she heard from me once a week, she was lucky.
What did you do for recreation when you were off duty?
Well, maintenance guys, our day is usually 12 hours long, so pretty much, depending where you were, like when we were in Libya, we used to spend our time down at the beach. It just depends what recreation is there. When we went into Sardinia, our time off, like Friday, we'd take the bus, get off at a beach resort, stay there, catch a bus back Sunday night. It's whatever you could make of it. I mean, when I was in Germany, we used to travel around, get on the trains, go into Cologne, depending what time of the year it is. If it was Christmas, Cologne is beautiful, things like that.
What kind of friendships did you form while serving?
Well, we've got friends that, wow, we've got friends 25 years. The wife used to be, in England, she was what they call a registered childminder. And she took care of a lot of military children. And we're still in contact with the families, and the children are still in contact with us. So, and the people I've worked with, I've got one that contacted me. He's now moved to Summer Glen. I've got another one in France. They're looking at moving to Summer Glen once they sell their house in France. So you keep in touch, even if it's not constant. All of a sudden nowadays with email, it's great. You might just get an email from somebody you haven't heard from in a long time. Or Facebook, the bases we're at, they all have their home pages. So if you go on there, sometimes you'll see somebody and you can drop them a line. Just ask them how they're doing, where they're at, things like that. And it's nothing on your birthday to get, happy birthdays in that Facebook thing. And from people you haven't seen in 15, 20 years.
Who were your best friends when you were serving?
Let's see, I got Harry Hart. We used to get tasked when I was sort of younger, and the two of us would get tasked to go fix broken airplanes. So, and we loved it. We'd come home from maybe a Canadian base over in Holland and in Germany, and then turn around and go to another base if an airplane broke. So, and then family friends that we became really acquainted with in England. We've stayed friends with them. They travel back and forth. We get visitors here from the UK that stay with us for a couple of weeks and then go travel out, things like that. So you do keep a lot of your old friendships.
Where were you when the war ended?
Which war?
Vietnam.
Vietnam, let's see. I was in Thailand because I was stationed at Udorn Air Force Base, and we flew our missions over there, but I caught the tail end because my class, when we graduated from training from school, most of them went to England. I said, no, I'm going to stay in England. That's when I went to Florida the first time. And then 6 months later, I got orders to England to be with the same people. I said I'd stay in the States and wouldn't stay. We were all back together, the whole class. Had a twin base operation called Bentwaters and Woodbridge, and that was in Suffolk, England.
Did you admire the people you served with?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you what, and it's something I still carry now. If you have a responsibility, I don't question that responsibility. You have a job to do, you do it. Whether it be a doctor, whether it be anybody else. I've learned that through the military, people who have responsibilities take the responsibility seriously, and you don't have to tell them. It's not as if you have to chase people down or to get things done. Things are happening because they accept responsibility. I don't know how you want to read that, but it's different. I feel that a lot of people don't accept. They have the responsibility, they know it, but they need somebody to tell them to do it. And the military, you don't have to. If somebody sees something or whatever, they go ahead and do it.
Did you ever witness any kind of combat?
Depends whether you ask, do you mean have I ever been shot at? We were in Guam once, changing aircraft out, F-4s for Thailand. Some guy came along. The restaurant we stayed at was a Continental, and they just sprayed the front window with a machine gun as they went by. And then even in Thailand, we used to go down to trim pad, which was, let's say the base was up at that far end of the table. The trim pad where we do the engine work was that end, and there was nothing. And then we could hear gunfire out there as they were trying to come through the gate. But the Thai guards were sort of firing back. But we still got our butts up and went back to the other end.
Were you ever wounded?
No.
That's good. Did you ever have to witness any kind of destruction or casualties?
Well, I didn't witness the casualties as per se. Where I worked, and I was a resource manager, the services squadron was responsible for mortuary affairs. So if if an aircraft came through with coffins on it, the organization I was with supplied all the support to maintain these coffins while the aircraft either remained overnight until they got another crew and flew out the next day. Which that during Afghanistan we were seeing that quite a bit coming through. They either stop at Ramstein Air Base, Germany. If it couldn't take them, it would come to Mildenhall in Suffolk.
Did you admire your commanding officers?
Some you do, some you don't. They all have different ethics, and how they do things. So, most of them I got along with. I moved straight up to wing. I worked directly for the wing commander in the IG, and as I said, I had a job, I did it, and they had no qualms about how I did it. Except when I used their name in vain, threw it out there to get something done.
What are some of your most memorable experiences during the service?
Well, most of them, like you say, Tehran was one. When the Shah was leaving, we got to meet his son and things like that. And then also when I was in Libya, when Gaddafi took over, we were out on the flight line at 5 in the morning, and the 130s were landing, and off the back the tanks were coming. So we didn't really know anything was up. Like I say, some things you're there for and you don't know really, other than we're doing training. But sometimes back then, you'd be sent somewhere and there'd be an ulterior motive why you're there. But back then they didn't tell you. No. But any of those experiences in Europe were great. Germany, I lived in Holland for 4 years. It was fantastic. Food's great. European food is good. Just got to watch what you eat, You can gain too much weight over there.
Did you fly home as well?
Well, I retired in '92, and I stayed over there. That's where I picked up the position. I did a base closure after I retired. I actually was a base closure officer for RAF Bentwaters in England. It was a bad move, but I liked it there. East Anglia is a beautiful place to live. Then I moved up to Mildenhall, where I worked in. I started working employed as a sort of an assistant resource manager. I went home to visit the States one day. I came back. I was in charge. He decided to leave. And then I did 18 years as a resource manager there. So that's where I get the 40 years overseas, the extra 18 on the line.
You enjoyed all the time you were overseas?
Oh yes, loved it. We go back. Matter of fact, we're leaving the end of the month. We go twice a year just to see my son. We usually stay anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks.
How were you received by your family and your community when you returned home?
Well, this is the first. You wouldn't believe this. This is the first community in the United States that I've lived in, and we've enjoyed it here. The wife's happy here. My wife is British. She likes it here. The people are really nice. So this is my first community. Because everything else I had was overseas. So.
How did you adjust to civilian life?
Great. Very easy. Yeah, it was a little bit of a transition. I thought it would be hard. It wasn't hard for me at all. And you say civilian life, how do you transition from retired from one job, then you finally retire for good. And then you and your spouse are in the same house 24/7. It's tough. It's tough. You both have your ways of doing things.
What have you done since leaving the military?
Well, I did the 18 years as a resource manager for RAF Mildenhall, which was great, and I retired from that in February 2010. Some of the things we did, we accepted the responsibility for all the contingencies of all the troops coming from the States, going to the desert, and coming from the desert, going back to the States. They usually have a stopover anywhere from, depending if they're going, sometimes they could spend a week or two waiting for their time to go in country, and the ones coming back usually remained a short time. Just give the crew rest for the air crews, and then they were back on their way. During this period, just now that you mentioned some of it, I had a contingency of nurses that were there in case something seriously happened in the desert, and I had to take care of them, and I had to supply them with all the stuff that they needed and we gave them a condemned building, and they totally cleaned it. I've never seen anything like it. But it was great working with them. Must have been about 40 or 50 nurses, and we had them for about 3 months. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I say, the people you meet, it's just unbelievable.
Has your military service impacted your feelings about war?
It depends how you, I guess this is really I won't say it's a toughie. Right now, I think the world's going to, I don't know if I should say it that way. Well, yeah, it's going to shit in a handbasket. There's a lot of shit. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world, and there seems to be nobody in control. You know, whether wars or conflicts, as you want to call them, I don't think you'll see many wars. The conflicts are having because of all internal issues, and you know, and it's. I'll leave it at that.
How did your wartime experiences affect your life?
Well, I wouldn't say wartime. The only thing that ever happened is conflicts. Vietnam was a conflict. It's just, I don't know. I was young then, so I didn't think a lot about it. I think even if you were to do what I did, you'd be more into the job, and you don't think about the conflict because you have a responsibility of what you're going to do, and you take care of your business, and you know, and you just move on from there.
Do you have post-traumatic stress or know somebody who does?
Well, I think the post-traumatic stress thing has really come up since Afghanistan and everything else. I think there are people, or men and women, that were in Vietnam or associated with the conflict that have it, but in some essence, they don't know they have it because it was not something that was even considered back then. I mean, post-traumatic stress, I'd say I was lucky. I got to work with a prisoner of war, Vietnam prisoner of war, when I was in England. He came back to work for a while, and you know, was that considered post-traumatic stress at the time? No. I mean, he was actually put back to work. We had in the end, I worked in a vault, which the whole building was a vault. He came in, he had us empty a closet, and he actually had a desk and chair moved in there, and he'd come to work in the morning, go in there, shut the door, and unless the wing commander asked him to come up to have a word with him, he would not leave that room till it was quitting time, the end of the day. But back then they didn't call it post-traumatic stress. Mentally he was in bad shape.
What effect did serving in the military have on your faith or spirituality?
I think you'll find most military, I won't say they're more religious, but I think they attend church more because church is also another place where the community interacts. The chaplains were always on the flight line. The chaplains were always wandering around. I would say when you think of military and you think of religion, it's there, and it's fairly strong. But no matter what denomination you are, the church takes care of it. And somebody's always available. I had a little incident. I was part of an exercise evaluation. I was the exercise evaluation team. So I was wounded, supposedly, and the guy says, well, what can you do for me? I said, I want a priest. Wow, and they had whoa, the chaplains are never part of our exercises. Well, if I'm dying, who am I going to want to see? If I'm Jewish, I want to see a rabbi. I'm Catholic, I want to see a priest. And they panicked around. They finally got one to come out, and they said, just don't do that again. But but it's a truth. When you're in a situation like that, I know if you were in a war zone, they would be there. They'd be in the hospital. But, you know, we were doing an exercise, and I thought, well, what happens if somebody asks? And we got the results we wanted, so that's just one of the little... But I would do quirky things during exercises.
Would you want your son or daughter to enter the military?
I would have no objection to it, except I'd tell them to get an education, get at least a minimum of 2 years of college, and go in as an officer. That's what I would tell them. They can basically get into, if they have a field, like my son's in IT, even if he went in as an officer, if his IT skills were that good, he would be steered to that, depending what you wanted to do. If you were an architect or an engineer, they may move you. An engineer, you might think, oh, I build buildings, build bridges, but the next thing you know, you might be in charge of a squadron of airplanes because you're an engineer. It's the basics of what your background. So if you're thinking of joining the military, join the Air Force and go in as an officer.
Are you a member of any veteran organizations?
Yeah, several. I'm part of the Summer Glen Veterans. I'm also on the management board for the Honor Flight.
Have you remained in contact or reunited with any fellow veterans?
Yes, like I said, they come over from, well, we get them in from England. I got the one going to move here from France. And again, I hate to say it, but Facebook is a good outlet. You get to, you may not see them physically, but at least you know they're there and you can have some words with them. Even though, you know, your lifestyles have changed. They may live way up north, whatever, but you still remember each other.
What are some life lessons you learned in the military?
Wow. Well, probably the biggest thing is don't drink as much as you used to. You know, I never smoked, so that wasn't an issue. Mind you, cigarettes was only 10 cents a pack, but I don't know. What can I say? I'm pretty well organized. I won't say I'm meticulous to some extent. And I try to manage things. I learned more so when you're in management or senior years, you learn to manage more. And then you start managing your life a little bit different. And you try to organize it. How's that?
What lessons would you pass on to today's generation?
Well, I think they need to travel about and get to see what the real world's about before they start questioning how things are done and why things are done. And I was thinking about this on the way up here, that because we were watching the news, and I think they need to, I won't say get a life, they need to find out what the real world's about, because they protest on these different things, and you know what, and nothing against school kids or high school kids or teenagers or early 20s, but they don't know what life is outside the United States. At one time, I don't know how many years ago, I remember the statistic, 95% of Americans did not have passports until they finally passed a thing in that you will have a passport. But 95, so that tells you they don't travel much. And now it's not safe to travel. We did a lot of traveling. We did Egypt, Israel, Morocco. I did the whole North African thing, and you can see, even when we went into Egypt, we were in Luxor, in the main street there, and it's modern. You go one block back to the market, and you've just stepped 2,500 years back in time. The people still dress the same. They live in mud huts. Everything is the same as it was 2,500 years ago. And their clothing is whiter than white. My wife loved them how they do it, because they're in the dust and the mud all the time. They're just, but you know, there's things people need to see before they start, you know, saying how this is and how that is. I mean, we went into, and like Israel's another thing. Everybody, you know, there's a war going on, but if you go to Israeli market, the Algerians have one part, the Israelites have another, and there's another group in another. And everybody shops. They're all there together, you know. So we hear a lot what the news wants to put out there. Not that I'd want you to travel there, but it'd be an experience. I think you'd really love it. We did the Nile cruise. We did all of that. It's just phenomenal. The best holiday we've ever had was a Nile cruise, for what you can see, because it's not just a cruise. You stop at 10 different destinations, plus Luxor itself is a monument. They're tearing houses down, and they're finding Roman roads underneath them, still intact. You just wonder how the sand got over the top of them. I can go on about traveling. We just love it.
Is there anything I forgot to ask you about your military experience?
Not really, not that I can think of.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, I think it'll probably come to me after I leave here, you know. No, I think I would recommend the military if somebody could enjoy that way of life. It is different. You'll definitely get some life experiences. I mean, I had good friends that used to travel to the desert and stuff, and it's total, the experiences are unbelievable, what you can do and how you're going to live, or how you think you should live and you're going to live, you know, things like that. I'll come up with some stuff later on. Never fails, you know. I'm good at impromptu sometimes, but not. I'm getting too old. My mind doesn't think as quick as it used to.
All right then.
But thanks for the interview.
Thank you
I
so
enjoyed
much.
it, yeah.